Next up, we have Joyce. Connor is Senior User Researcher at Microsoft, previously of BetterUp, Twilio, and Deloitte. He's the inventor of the impact mindset, which is detailed in his book, Bridging Intentions to Impact, and you can have a chat with him at 4:30. He's going to be doing a book signing in the library, so go check it out there. He's also a TEDx speaker and has years of experience in user research and applied behavioral science. Last night, he introduced me to cornbread, which, guys, if you're just lying to yourselves, this is not bread, it's cake. It's definitely cake. But yeah, more from Connor now.
Thank you, Lily. It was sweet potato corn cake too, so cornbread. So it was cake. But hello everybody, Connor Joyce, and let me start by saying thank you all for coming. It's the last session of the conference, at least the last breakout. So really glad to see you all here, and I'm excited to share a couple of things I've become really passionate about over the last year with you all, especially with this AI revolution. Why I ultimately am here talking about this, and Lily gave me a great introduction, but the two main reasons is I wrote a book called Bridging Intention to Impact, which focuses on measuring specific user behaviors as a mechanism to change user outcomes, so defining features based on the behaviors that they change. The other reason is I'm a senior user researcher on the Copilot team, where we're building a lot of AI features. If you've seen Copilot, you've seen it's proliferating around the product. And the intersection of these two things is the purposeful application of AI, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So before we jump into that, it is the last session, and so we're going to do a little bit of interactivity. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand in a second. Raise your hand if you have any AI features on your product roadmap. Pretty much everybody, okay. Well, keep your hands raised if you have three features on your product roadmap. Okay, good amount. How about 5? Losing some. I still see a few. 10? No 10s? Okay, all right. So still 5, some pretty significant amounts of features on roadmaps. So it is showing AI is proliferating everywhere, and there's a lot of pressure to get it into products. So now I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. If you previously raised your hand about AI features, raise your hand if you have uncertainty around whether or not it's actually going to make an impact. So it looks like pretty much that raised their hand. Everyone who raised their hand previously raised their hand there. And it's real. I think every feature we launch has some uncertainty on whether or not it's going to make an impact. And AI only accentuates that. We've got all the traditional things, technological challenges. Really, are we building the right solution for whatever product is, or for whatever we're trying to attempt with that feature, with our product? Those are all table stakes whenever we're developing. When we add in AI, there's a whole new slew of concerns. There is the new technological challenges. There is the fact that this is a system that can have multiple iterations to it. In other words, you can pretty much have a conversation with it. You can build off of its own outputs. So it brings with it new technological challenges. And then it's the fact that the majority of us, we are using foundational models that are being built by somebody else. We are using the technology, the APIs of others that are constantly changing. And many of those providers, especially OpenAI and Google, they have their own products that they're using. They're the first to use the new models in these products. They're the ones that can build products knowing what that roadmap of what is coming out will actually bring. And they can take out entire products, let alone entire industries, as we've seen with things like custom GPTs, where one change in ChatGPT took out a whole collection of startups. So the uncertainty is real. We are in a new space. The question I want you to ask yourself, take a quick pause and legitimately ask yourself this. Think of one of those features you raised your hand on. What evidence led you to use AI for that feature? Through this presentation, I'm going to teach a couple of different approaches. I'm going to teach an approach based on a framework and a mental model on how to leverage AI purposefully to ensure its strengths will drive a meaningful behavior change and ultimately an outcome for both your user and your business. We're going to do this in 5 steps. The first is a reminder of why we build, just quick table stakes. Then I'm going to introduce the user outcome connection. It's the core framework in my book, and it's, again, thinking about features through the behaviors that they change. We're going to talk about a mindset around AI. It is not per se a framework, but it's just a new way to think about generative AI that's helpful in choosing if it's the right approach to apply to your feature. We're going to combine these two. And then I'm going to leave you with a template that you can use to do it if you want to go and start today. Through this, I'm going to talk about 2 features. These are both features that I worked on in a previous company. One was successful, and one wasn't. And we're going to kind of diagnose why that was, utilizing these different approaches. The first one was called the Daily Check-In. It was a chatbot that was built to help someone take a pause in their day and think through think through their emotions and how to approach resolving any negative emotions that they were feeling. This was the unsuccessful feature. On the flip side, the successful feature was called the Daily Challenge. It was a Slack integration that utilized generative AI to create a problem and 3 potential solutions. One of the most famous problems that we deployed with it was, you have a daughter who has a dance recital. You also have a very important meeting at the same time. What do? Go to your daughter's recital, attend the meeting, or demand that the meeting be changed? This was an AI-generated question. We would embed that into Slack and have people answer one of those 3 options, and it would present all 3 of the answers, what proportion of people chose it. But it didn't end there. It showed the next most popular opinion, why someone would choose that. So if I chose go to the dance recital, it would show why someone might choose going to the meeting instead. The whole intent was to try to build empathy, and this was successful. We'll diagnose more about that. So I've talked about features a lot, and again, this is the table stakes part of the presentation, so just to make sure everybody's on the same page as I use some of these words, I'm going to say features a lot. And in my mind, a lot of products are the same. It is the few unique features that each product has that differentiate it if it's a market leader, if it's another one in the pack, or ultimately if it fails. And so I believe that those features, the ones that create your unique value proposition, those are the ones that are most important for you to ensure you're purposefully applying AI. When we think about features, there's a few main reasons why we want to create them. And again, this is the desired reasons. When we think about creating those unique features that are really going to drive the value for a product, we think about first understanding our customer. We want to empathize with them. We want to understand their problem. We want to get in their head. We understand why do they want to use our product. We want to define their solution, or we want to define their problem so we can create the right solution for them. And a lot of us want to innovate. Again, that is one of the biggest reasons when I talk to people why they get into tech. They see the potential to build things at scale, and it is exciting. And when you ask product managers, or really anybody on product teams, why do you want to build? They will commonly say one of these reasons. The reality is, though, that is not what actually generally drives the development of features. Instead, especially in the AI space, we are seeing so much pressure from leadership and marketing, you gotta get generative AI into that product. That pressure is real, and it makes sense for the second reason, which is feature parity. When one company in your marketplace does it, there's a reason for you to go and jump on and do the same thing, especially if it looks like it's driving success for them. And it's funny, I love product conferences because I've had this internal debate over product intuition, which is another common reason. You have a really strong leader that says this is the direction we have to go. And in some cases, that's the right approach. I mean, we probably would not have the iPhone in its current existence, or at least it would have taken a lot longer, if they only followed research, because no one was going to say, I want a GPS, I want a phone, I want everything that the iPhone does all in one device. But it was a product visionary that saw the path there. We also saw Quibi, which was led with a lot of product intuition. For those of you that don't know Quibi, it was going to be short form Netflix. Huge investment, whole bunch of content, and if you haven't heard of Quibi, even though it was a multi-million-dollar company at one point, that shows you how successful they were. So those are the reasons that we commonly see features actually built. And that is troublesome to start, but it's especially troublesome because of the unique challenges that I referenced when it comes to generative AI. These are costly systems, and they're only getting more costly. These are, again, technically challenging. So if you have your engineering team jump on trying to create an AI solution because that's just what has to happen, that's a lot of engineering resources that may be going to something that's going to flop immediately. And then, as again, we've heard throughout this conference, these systems sometimes hallucinate. They sometimes will actually misdirect people. They'll sometimes lie. And so they come with additional externalities that you have to be concerned of that can really push customers away. So again, going back to basics, when we think about why we build features, they should solve problems. I have never met a person that says, I use this solution because I really just want to use it. That's the only reason. It makes me so happy using it. No matter what the product is, they use it for a reason. They will have some sort of need that they are trying to capture. Sometimes that's information, sometimes it's entertainment. Even in like Netflix binging and all of those sort of things, there's still some sort of need that's behind it. It's not just for usage's sake alone. Now, when we think about what those outcomes are, most of us are trained in design thinking or jobs to be done. Two canonical theories around building things that work for people. And they're great frameworks. I use them all the time. I do think they have one gap, though. And that is that they end, for the most part, at user outcomes. They define the user outcome really well. They build that empathy. They understand the job that someone is looking to hire a tool for. But then they say, go solve it. It's not that simple. There's other great frameworks out there. But overall, they miss the point that the way that people solve problems, digital or not, is they physically change their behavior. And that can be done, again, in the physical world or in a digital space, but it's still them changing what behaviors they take. And that is the addition of the user outcome connection, is that specific behavior focus. The addition of those behaviors, identifying them, is then you can also measure them. And it opens you up to a whole new field of measurements. Now, when companies apply AI, thinking purely about those user outcomes, it can lead them astray. A couple of examples. One of my favorite ones, just because it happened pretty early. It didn't capture that much attention, but it did just show me how it was so easy to just think, wow, generative AI is powerful, we could build something amazing, was this company called Gannett AI. If any of you are here that were part of this is a great example. No offenses intended. I think it is a good example of how just building with the technology first can lead teams astray. So they were a company that helped local newspapers write articles on local sports teams. We're thinking high school sports at this level. Obviously, generative AI was like, whoa, this is a great opportunity to really be able to build these articles at scale. But what was the data that it was trained on? Well, it was more professional sports articles. And so it ultimately was writing local newspaper articles for an audience of people that were looking to build community around that local sports team, but it was doing it in a way like it was a professional sports team. And so it talked about high school athletes like they were professional athletes, sometimes bashing them, sometimes talking about them not in a good light, which is not the point. People are looking for the high school athletes in a significantly different lens. It missed the point of why people were actually trying to read, the behavior they were trying to change. It wasn't that they were just looking for information. It was that they were looking to gain something from that article so they could feel like they were connected to their community. Or that maybe they would go and look up a high school athlete because they wanted to track them and see what college are they going to? Are they going to make it to the big leagues? It totally missed that point. And it got a lot of bad feedback from people that said this article was being mean to a high school student. Similarly, Snapchat, when they first, very soon after ChatGPT came out, Snapchat came out with a suite of features, one of which was a chat bot that was embedded in people's feed of their contacts. And it worked. It was a good chat bot, but it had no purpose. And it didn't even really try to have a purpose. It was just like, hey, you can talk to this chat bot. It's your friend now. It totally missed the point of why people use Snapchat. They actually want connection with somebody, not just to have a conversation. And then on the right side, and this is actually large enough so y'all can see, that is an image of what looks like it says side and then potentially something like ranch. And this one was not confirmed by Uber, but this is a big speculation. And again, it just shows any time that AI is involved in a product, it can catch bad light if it is not actually satisfying a user outcome, is people begin to notice images like this within Uber Eats. If you think about why are there images in a restaurant app, it's to help people drive at the outcome of choosing something that's going to satisfy their outcome of, I want food that I like. Well, if you see this image, it's probably not going to help you figure out if that's what you want, and it's going to make you go, well, what else is going here? How else am I getting lied to? And so this was another example of totally missing the actual outcome that is trying to be driven, and AI pretty much making it worse. So circling back to it, the whole point of what I'm trying to boom. The point that I'm trying to make here is that ending at user outcomes can work, but it can also make you miss the point of what you're really trying to do, which is change that outcome through changing specific behaviors. And properly applying AI means that it is the best tool for changing those behaviors. It's time for the framework. So I've already said this a couple of times, and it's a pretty simple framework, but just to fully reiterate it, is that the user outcome connection starts with what is the user outcome I'm trying to change with my feature. If it is a solution that's supposed to help someone create an emergency savings account, that's the outcome, is increased savings. The business outcome is, if I satisfy that outcome, is it going to do something for my business? Is it actually going to drive retention? Is it actually going to increase brand loyalty or organic marketing? And then the new piece, the one that comes from what I'm saying here, is the specific behaviors. What are the specific behaviors that I can ultimately measure that will lead to that user outcome? That could be an increased amount of auto-enrollment in how much money is going to that savings, a decreased amount of taking out of that savings. There's a lot of different ways to define these behaviors that ultimately connect into the user outcome, and there is no single answer. But that's what is going to build a good product, is actually figuring out what do I change to drive that outcome to be satisfied. Now, the power of this framework, again, is not just that definition, which that definition alone is a tool for alignment, but it causes you to now have 5 levels of success metrics. We all know usage, and look, usage is a very powerful metric. I'm never going to say that usage is not valuable, and that's not the point of this. If you build the best thing in the world and no one uses it, I would not call that a success. But usage and growth, they're just one metric of an entire suite of metrics that are out there. Usability is a whole nother suite. Satisfaction, NPS, ease of use, those are all usability. And again, it tells you you're building something that is good. You're building something that people are liking. Those are all great things, and you want to have things that are helping people feel good. But it's still neither usage nor usability are actually telling you, is this working for driving user outcomes? You only get that through measuring the behavioral outcomes and the user outcomes. Through understanding, is it changing behaviors that we know are connected to that user outcome, and then ultimately with that user outcome. And then this is a mostly product audience, so you all already are very familiar with the business outcome. But since I talk about this also to researchers and the entire product team, it's always good to include business outcomes there too, because we need to build things that ultimately work for the business too. So going back to those features, we're going to start with the daily check-in. As a reminder, that was a chatbot that was there to help people check in with their emotions and then begin to work through them if they were having challenging emotions. And the specific behaviors here was taking pauses during the workday and participating in reflection activities. That was connected to the user outcome of increased feelings of mindfulness and enhanced productivity. And the goal of this was, if people did that, well, they would retain to the platform because they'd say, hey, this is actually helping me be more productive. It would expand licenses, and it would increase brand loyalty. This ultimately didn't work. On the flip side, with the daily challenge, this again was that Slack integration that asked survey questions and then was an empathy-building tool around showing another's perspective. The specific behaviors here was conversations with colleagues, participations in the activities, and then sharing others' perspectives. The outcome was a greater sense of connectivity and enhanced collaboration with teammates. And it had the same business outcome. And this feature ultimately did work at driving both those behaviors. And when those behaviors happened, we saw an increase in the outcomes. So having this user outcome connection, and hopefully these examples begin to show it to you, first it defines your feature. It gives you an opportunity to quickly be able to show anyone that you're working with, this is what we actually hope the feature does. And then from there, you now are able to decide as you're designing what the solution is, what is the best tool to drive behavior change. And that includes with AI. It is the ability to evaluate if AI is the right solution for whatever behaviors you're trying to drive. So you maybe think to yourself, okay, cool. Like this makes sense. Specific behaviors, I've kind of heard this before, but we're here to talk about AI. What exactly? Help me think through figuring out if AI is the right solution. And so that's what brings up to this mindset. Again, I wouldn't call this exactly a framework, but it's more of just a mindset. If you think about AI, you can think about it very high level and think to yourself, okay, AI, generative AI, that's its own, maybe model level, we'll call it. And you're thinking, every model comes with enhancements, new abilities, et cetera. You also can think about it at a very low level and say the specific uses. What are the specific exact ways, maybe prompt level, maybe we'll say prompt level, of the exact things that you can do with it. That's how I generally see people. They're very high level or they're very specific. My middle ground and how I try to communicate with product teams around AI is what I call superpowers. And so superpowers are clusters of use cases, clusters of patterns on how to use this technology. I'm going to go through a couple here. I've written about more, but my intent is not to tell you that I have the exhaustive list of superpowers, because I don't. I have just seen recurring patterns, and I have begun to apply them in some of the work that I'm doing in my main job. But how I want you to try to think through this as I give some examples of these superpowers is what are some of the clusters of ways to use AI that you see your competitors doing or that you're trying to do? And with those superpowers, you can begin to make the quick judgment of, is AI the right solution for this? Or is it more of a traditional tool that I can go out and use to actually do that work? So I'm going to share a couple superpowers here. These are ones that you all have seen before and that are pretty widely applicable. The first being content creation and manipulation. So content creation and manipulation, we've all seen this. If you've used ChatGPT, you've probably asked it, write me a poem like a pirate. Or take this content and rewrite it for this audience. This is content creation, and manipulation. It is what we're seeing with so many features being created at this point. We've seen it with Notion AI, which is one of my personal favorite examples of AI being applied. It's not perfect, but it has been very successful for Notion. I literally think that whenever I hear people say Notion now, I pretty much hear them say Notion AI. So all of a sudden, that became their product in some ways. And for those of you that are not familiar with Notion, it was pretty much a blank slate doc that you could do a whole bunch of stuff in it. People would say you could utilize it to pretty much replace any SaaS product at a small scale. It was more of a startup, small business product. But they came out and said, okay, well, how do we build AI into this product? And they built this inline editor. So you would see this box. Let's just say you wrote a couple paragraphs in Notion, you would see this inline editor that had a bunch of potential features that the AI could do on top of you writing in your own prompt. You could go in there and start it by saying, create me an outline. You could give it a paragraph and say, rewrite this as a single sentence. Or you could use any of their pre-built functionalities. It all revolved around creation of content and manipulation of content or rewriting it. On the flip side, we're seeing with GitHub Copilot, which is tremendous at being able to create code. Engineers are likely going to be the first professional in the knowledge work space that hits this whole 10x of productivity, and it's through tools like GitHub. I see engineers now that are able to churn out in 1 hour what used to take them a day. And it's in part because of things like GitHub and Cursor and these other tools that are ultimately just creating and manipulating content, the content being code. The other superpower that I'll reference is perspective taking. This one I've not seen built into as many products. Instead, I've seen more products actually being built around it. Perspective taking starts with the collective knowledge that these systems have. Now, big asterisks, and we just had a presentation about the ethics of it, so I want to make sure that I hit on this. Collective knowledge is still very biased, and there is work being done to determine that bias and correct for that bias, because it is still being trained on a very specific set of data. This said, it is being trained on a lot of that data, and so in the knowledge work specific arena, especially in a Western environment, it can do a really good job determining what someone else is thinking. Because someone has probably gone through pretty much any scenario that an individual faces, there is another out there that has probably done it, and the system probably was trained on that data. And because of that, these systems have a superpower around this perspective taking. And we've seen it in apps like synthetic users, that while whether or not it's actually a functional product in its ability to ask questions, research questions to a synthetic user, to a fake user, they can do a good job at constructing a fake person, giving a bunch of different demographic aspects. They started, and there is a bunch of companies that have now followed with the thought around how do we take these systems and be able to actually recreate the perspective of another based around the data that these systems have been trained on. In a similar space, or in a similar application in a different space, there's a tool called First Round AI that's doing it with interviews. You can go in there and train it on the job description. You can train it on the company, and it will act like that hiring manager. It's going to take the perspective of that hiring manager. Now, those are two examples. Again, this is not meant to be exhaustive. There's many other superpowers that are out there and for all of us to discover ultimately. But the other reason I really like this framework is because as new models are built, you're able to apply this same level of thinking. So as soon as I saw O1 come out, that's the new model from OpenAI, that was how I thought about it, was what superpowers is this bringing? And there's a couple, one of which is verification. With the deductive reasoning that this system now brings, we can give it a set of parameters and ask it to validate that a set of content matches those parameters. It can verify, it can pretty much do like an audit would be another way to say it. And that was something that 4.0 and most other systems, really all of other systems, could do, but not the best. And then all of a sudden, a new system comes out and it can do it really well. So this is a whole new suite of features where once I would have said, that's probably better for a traditional tool. Now, LLMs could be a good tool for a verification behavior that needs to be changed. Hopefully this is making sense. Whenever I've presented this, I always like to just give an opposite example, too, of what we can call the kryptonite. I haven't found the right word for the opposite of a superpower. But a version of this would be a needle in a haystack. Now, I see this in my work all the time. I see research tools trying to do this and generally not succeeding at it. But so this is an example of what LLMs do not do a good job, what generative AI does not do a good job with. And it's differentiating, it's using critical thinking to differentiate between an insight that is backed by a bunch of data. Let's say if I'm doing a research project and I see this insight was said by 10 users across 3 data sources versus this insight was just one user and one data source, the LLMs will generally say, these are both important insights for you. It does not do a good job finding that really important insight, the one that is clearly the one that you have to really be concerned about. And so if somebody were to say, I'm thinking about building a feature in this space, this is an easy one to say, we don't think the technology is there yet. Let's go with whatever traditional tools we may have. So with this superpower framework, the whole aim is you now have the user outcome connection, which has defined your feature, specific behaviors, user outcomes, business outcomes. Now you have these superpowers, which is the way that you can choose, is this tool, the tool of generative AI, the right solution to change that behavior? That is what this slide says. The next slide, from there, the point is, from there, the goal is to actually validate, is this the right approach? So we've come up and we've said, okay, we believe that this feature should change this behavior. We believe changing that behavior will change that user outcome and ultimately drive a successful business outcome. Each of those, until we have data, are just assumptions. The three assumptions are the behavioral assumption, the user outcome assumption, and the business assumption. Three different gaps there that ultimately need to be filled with data. In the purpose of this presentation, the main one is the behavioral assumption. We're asking not only, is this behavior changed by the feature, but is generative AI the most important or the most effective way at changing that behavior? It's two main questions there. In the two examples that I gave, the one that didn't work was that daily check-in. The chatbot, let's talk about emotions. The reality is, it didn't work because none of the superpowers really were useful there. We could create content, we could have chats, but that wasn't the point of the feature. It was supposed to help the person look inwards, and we tried to do that just by getting them to say things, and then the bot pretty much repeating it back to them, and it didn't change that behavior. People didn't actually engage in the activity. They didn't care about their emotions. They didn't try to, if we even identified an emotion they were feeling, the system was not good at helping them find a path to feeling better about that emotion. So people used it once, they didn't find it effective, and they pretty much didn't use it afterwards. So it didn't hit any of those superpowers. When we tested it with a traditional approach, we just had a simple user interface, and we asked them to click one word to describe an emotion they were feeling. People engaged with that much more, and then we were able to bring it over to a chatbot and have them actually work through that single emotion. But the catalyst of it was not anything really special beyond the conversational ability that these systems have. It was the actual user interface of showing them images of emotions. And so again, generative AI was not the best entry point for this. Flip it to the other side with the daily challenge, and it proved to be extraordinarily useful. Never before, without surveying a bunch of people, having an entire content team sit down and think through all of these different questions, all of the different answers, and all of the different reasons why someone would choose a different answer, that would take hours, days, months of labor to do. And we were able to do that instantly and curated to whatever team we wanted to, thanks to generative AI. We were able to show people other perspectives, and it worked. People would say, I would choose to go to the meeting over my daughter's dance recital, and then they would see someone that chose to move the meeting. Why would they choose that? And in what was the outcome of it? People went and commented on it, and they started a discussion in Slack, trying to understand, did you actually think that if you chose this, was it actually because of this? And people talked about it, and they felt more connected to their team because of it. It really pulled on that perspective-taking superpower. Getting to this, though, getting to the ability to say this one worked and this one didn't work, it required evidence. And that's, again, the power of the user outcome connection, is by defining a feature based on those three aspects and having those three assumptions, you immediately are saying, we need evidence now to validate those assumptions. And that evidence comes in two ways. The first is finding that evidence. If you are if you're at a big company especially, it's common that you'll find yourself siloed by your data. If that's the case, go out and talk to your teams. Your sales and marketing teams, they probably have good data that will say if user outcomes actually lead to business outcomes. Go talk to your user research and your data science team. They likely have good data that says, what behaviors could change a user outcome? When it comes to the specific behaviors, most of the time, unless you have very good event data, with using something like a segment or an M particle, or you have a very advanced data analytics practice, there's going to be less data around, is that specific behavior being changed by the feature? And that's when you have the opportunity to go out and create it. Creating data will require some level of experimentation here to see, does the addition of that feature actually change behaviors? When I say experimentation, I generally see, and it's Optimizely actually has a great study that shows this, is like 1% of companies do 80% of experiments on their platform, and then, and don't quote me on these numbers, but it's some absurd number, and then the next 15% do like 19%, and then everybody else does 1%. And so whenever I say experimentation, I can see an audience. There's a good chunk of people that are like, Ooh, experimentation. That's something I always want to do. There's a couple people like, oh, cool, we do that. And there's a few people that are like, no chance. Like, there's no way we're ever going to do that. When I say experimentation, though, I'm not talking about randomized control trials. I'm not talking about academics. I'm not talking about all of these things that generally are associated with experimentation. I'm talking about just getting a product or getting a feature in front of a user and seeing if it actually does change the behaviors that you're curious about. At its easiest, that's usability testing. At scale, that's A/B testing. It's less about rigor. It's more about just getting data. It's just about getting evidence. Some evidence indicating that your assumption is correct is better than no evidence. And you can use the metrics that you are able to define now because you defined your feature using the user outcome connection. So as we talk more about validation, we want to do this because as we are able to get that evidence that behind those assumptions, we can make more confident decisions. We can make more confident investments. We can share that data, any sort of experimentation, any sort of evidence that we gather or create, we can share that with anybody who wants to know about the feature. We can share it with our customers, especially for those that are in B2B. A lot of times, the person who's buying that B2B solution, they want to have some data that can justify why they're spending money on that product. You can share this evidence with them. It's a marketing tool. You can make changes. If you've realized your feature isn't working, and it's not fun, but it's better to realize it earlier than later. And this type of experimentation leads you to those insights. It creates data that are new leading indicators that can ultimately be there to monitor progress as it goes on. It also positions you, if you are the one that creates this user outcome connection, as the catalyst of beginning to form a new culture, one that focuses on evidence-based decision making. It positions you as the person who's asking the question from the beginning, what evidence led us to this decision? And that question alone, to a company that really wants to build product and has a culture already focused around thinking about really how to solve user outcomes, that question is going to cause more people to ask that question. Where did the evidence come? What evidence do we have? It also will lead, and regardless of how this manifests, whether it's through a software or whether it's just a Google Doc, to beginning to put these definitions and the associated insights or evidence within a centralized location. I like to call those insights hubs. You can call it a research repository. You can call it whatever you want. But it's good to have a home that just says, when we talk about feature A, we mean this is the definition, and this is why we believe it's going to work. So all of this is leading to the conclusion that behavior change, focusing on behavior change, is how to appropriately apply AI. If you like what you're hearing, you can scan this QR code. It's going to bring you to a Google Doc that has a template in it. I've tested it like 5 times and had other people, so if it doesn't work, then I'll figure out another way to do it, but hopefully it's going to actually bring you all to a template. And with that template, this again, you could start this user outcome connection. If you own a feature or you were working on a feature, you could do it probably by the time I finish in the next 2 minutes. From there, you begin to ask yourself the assumptions associated, and you can begin to address what evidence led to the use of the AI. When you see that you don't have that evidence, you can begin to go build it. And you do that through discovering it from other teams or through experimentation. And if you like what you're doing and you don't feel fully confident in doing it, we can have a conversation later. At 4:30, I'm going to be doing a book signing, or you can pick up a copy. So as I wrap up here, there's 3 things I really want to make sure you take away. The first is that strong feature definitions, they enable better evaluation of success. They create a demand for evidence that you can go and fill. Generative AI can be bucketed into superpowers. It is a way to think about it less abstract than just a whole level of generative AI is this thing that's changing the world, but more categorized than thinking about the specific prompt level of use. And then putting those together is that purposeful AI means it is the best tool for changing behavior. So I thank you all, and I'm happy to take the rest of the time for answering questions.
So I'm on a team. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So I'm on a team of evidence-based research. Usability research is definitely the way to go. What are your thoughts on Jacob's law for a specific avenue of products? Not avenue, but a specific genre of products. Or do you see Jacob's law being the trump card that just eliminates the evidence base?
So I'm going to phone a friend and ask, can you define Jacob's law? This is a NNGer right here, so.
Jacob's law states that users spend most of their time on other websites other than yours. Everybody hear that? Anybody not hear that? All right. All right, Jacob's law, Jacob Nielsen, I'm from Nielsen Norman Group, hi, states that people spend most of their time on other people's other websites other than yours. Essentially, that means that people are going to pick up and learn behaviors and patterns from other places and then try to apply it on yours.
Thank you, thank you. Kate's a great professional speaker. That's how I felt confident calling on her. And obviously NNG. So ultimately, I will go back to that slide where I was talking about the unique features. And I think that is the place that is the differentiator. I mean, I like to think about Uber a lot because what did Uber ultimately do that made it such a special company as it grew? Obviously, there's some questions around some of the legal pieces, and we'll put all that to the side for right now. And just, I think also, there was a couple key features that changed it from the beginning. It was the car showing up and you being able to track and literally watch your little car come across and be able to know where it was coming. I think they were the first to enable being able to call your driver too, so something was gonna happen. And so when I think about those unique features that ultimately differentiate a product, and that it is those that are the most critical for creating something that's going to drive a unique user outcome for that person, or be the unique solution for that user outcome. And so I'm pretty much just reiterating what I'm saying because I don't have a better answer than this, but it is, with those features, is extraordinarily important to really understand what are the best behaviors we can change to drive at that outcome, and then from there determining what is the tool to do it. In that case, it was a design decision. It was utilizing the data of how far away a car was from that driver that had hailed that ride, and then the decision to draw a little blue line or whatever it was. And I think that same thing, if the behavior there is giving that person patience, if the behavior is giving them the permission to go to another app and start to scroll on their phone because they know the car is 2 minutes away, rather than something that's just like, hey, get outside and be prepared. I think it's determining what exactly needs to be addressed to help them feel comfortable about that outcome. And then from there, from the AI piece would be, is that the tool that ultimately does that? So I'm pretty much just reiterating what I said, but hopefully that addressed it. Was there anything more there?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Hello. Thanks for the talk and for being a voice of reason in this AI hype cycle.
Thank you.
So one thought that I had, as you were, giving us your great talk, was that, even though there are folks like yourself who now are giving us these frameworks in terms of sort of like using evidence before we kind of like, plunge ourselves into this, world of useless AI features. Like you said, there are two main things that are in the way, right? Executives and marketing and peer pressure, right?
Yep.
So probably, I don't know if, nobody has a crystal ball, but probably most people, despite your talk, will still go and rush and create a bunch of useless features. So what do you think will happen, if we kind of like, had this just like trajectory of this happening in the next, let's say like 10 years, right? Where like the majority of the features on the AI side will be essentially probably not that successful because people are doing what they're doing today. what will happen? Like, will we eventually just come to a place where like 2-3 companies that actually used common sense and evidence-based methods will come to the top, or this will be more like a greater realization for everyone else that you have to be kind of careful with the AI features?
So I agree. As much as I'd love for everybody to go and immediately change their direction based on the book and based on the talk, we probably are on a course, and it's because of incentive alignment, ultimately. That's the root of so much, is just that there's misaligned incentives. If your product team is incentivized to build, they're gonna build. And it makes sense, because we all have jobs, and we wanna make sure we're fulfilling our duties for those jobs. So let's play that scenario out. I do think that the differentiator this time around is the cost of building an app has plummeted and is only going to continue. We saw that for anybody that made it to Ethan's talk yesterday. Like he literally started to build an app. Would it be a fully functioning app? Was it everything? Did it have all the security? No, but if he could build 25% in a demo, then the 75%, he's already 25% ahead of somebody who isn't doing that. So I believe that what we're going to see is a couple things. I think Chamath Palihapitiya, if I'm saying his name correctly, has a startup that's trying to replicate SaaS companies, but like 80% of the features. Just again, those table stakes pieces, which is enough for a lot of people. And he's doing it using AI, and they're going to try to charge 10% or 20% of what SaaS products are doing. So they're saying, we're going to give you 80% of the features for 20% of the cost. And so, I think we're going to see more of those. I think we're going to see startups with 1 to 4 people who are just churning out product and just completely upending other product teams where they're like, whoa, how did this come out of nowhere and now is already this successful? And it's going to I think it's going to destroy some companies, in reality, especially companies that are public and have the pressure of, I said where I work, so I'm not going to call them out explicitly, but take any company that you can think of on one of the Magnificent Seven or the FANG or whatever, they're pouring CapEx like crazy into this. How do you get the 20x return when you're doing billions of expenditure on this stuff? Honestly, we'll see. It's not through just churning out a bunch of features without doing this. So, I'm grateful to be at a place where I can share this with one of these companies, but there is a lot of potential for the people that don't understand that the differentiator here is that you really need to drive after user outcomes. And if you just slap technology to something, it's going to lead teams astray. I think it's just we've seen this with every technology as it destroys companies.
And I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, Connor.
What a way to end.
Please give Connor a huge, come on, there's more round of applause. Thank you so much.